Hi everyone, this is Module 6, The Wave of the Present. First, we look at the Nisbet and Schufel article, What's Next for Science Communication, Promising Directions and Lingering Distractions. First, the article uses the examples of climate change, evolution, food biotechnology, and nanotechnology to show the gaps that lie in current ways of science communication. And it has a detailed set of recommendations offered to address these gaps through public engagement, and science communication needs to be guided by careful formative research and not intuition and guesswork that spans various media platforms and audiences. We also mentioned that messages should show respect for the differences in knowledge, values, perspectives, and goals of the audience to whom the messages are being shown. And this essay also incorporates extensive published research done in this field over the past decade. Typical myths about public communication. Historically, the conflict between science communication and the public has been viewed as a matter of knowledge deficit that needs to be addressed through increased information or transmission. However, this has failed to reduce or eliminate the conflict. Research has shown that science literacy has only a small role to play in people's opinion forming exercise around controversial issues. In fact, their ideology, religious identity, and partisanship play a bigger role when they're trying to form an opinion around controversial issues. Hence, to avoid science being only an esoteric matter, one must realize people are cognitive misers, in that people, for the most part, are not interested nor understand scientific breakthroughs. Rather, they end up using shortcuts and heuristics in their decision making. Nevertheless, it is evident from research that science still holds a highly respected position in people's opinion, despite the complexity as shown by 90% approval of science as making life healthier, easier, and more comfortable while contributing to societal progress. Yet, a divergence between admiration and literacy has been clearly established by studies done, and the challenge lies in leveraging this respect in order to promote dialogue and public participation in reaching consensus on controversial matters. From transmission to dialogue, serious critiques of the deficit model came about in the 1990s from the wind study of English sheep farmers and the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. It proposed that skepticism is due to feelings of mistrust and alienation. This led to formulation of some common sense heuristics. Furthermore, in 2000, the UK House of Lords report outlined that scientific institutions need to move beyond one-way transmission to discussion forums where dialogue and exchange of views take place. These discussion forums have shown that participants learn about the social, ethical, and economics implications of the scientific topic and foster respect for public concerns and outcomes that run counter to one's original preference. These discussion forums should not only be at a later stage of the scientific discovery, but rather in the upstream as well, so that matters of ownership, regulation, uses, applications, benefits, and risks can be discussed. Instead of using these forums to simply manufacture consensus around existing policy options, these forums should be rather mechanisms for expressing, identifying, and rethinking modes of governance where disagreement leads to identifying alternatives. Framing and public engagement. Drawback of discussion forums is their small scale and scope. Frames decide what is at stake, who is responsible, and where solutions can come from. Successful framing requires linkages between two concepts or things. A religious and moral frame around environmental issues appeals to a religious audience. Framing of issues needs to be done at a grassroots level through consensus conferences, deliberative forums, and town meetings. New forms of user-centered and user-controlled media such as blogs, online videos, and social media can be used effectively to generate grassroots support. Scientists need to use newer frames of for communication that fit the current media. Frames should not be viewed as a marketing tool for selling science, rather for providing a means for meaningful conversation around an issue. Different frames are given in the subsequent table that will be used in framing appropriately around four specific and controversial issues: climate change, evolution, biotechnology, and nanotechnology. As we consider this table, we can see the various frames that are laid out that will be considered in the next four examples. Frames that have been used in climate change, evolution, biotechnology, and nanotechnology with varying degrees of success and opposition. Climate change typically gets framed in a conflict where everything centers around scientific uncertainty uh, or economic development. And the people in the camp proposing climate change tend to approach it from a Pandora's box or a public accountability frame. However, it has been seen more effective to rather use the morality and ethics frame around the religious and evangelical Christian audience, and more so recently with the unique public health frame has been found effective as well. Evolution, on the other hand, has typically been around public accountability and social progress, whereas what's been found effective recently is middle way or a compromise frame. The most ineffective is, of course, the conflict frame that pits science against religion. Plant biotechnology, again, social progress and economic competitiveness have found favor. Also, middle way has been uh, an effective frame. Uh, Pandora's box frame is typically used by those who oppose plant biotechnology, and public accountability is for those who want greater oversight. Nanotechnology also finds favor in the public accountability frame, and the Pandora's box tends to cause nanotechnology to be framed in more negative light. And social progress is the one that has been most effectively used in Europe as far as nanotechnology is concerned. The authors propose 8 ways for forward looking directions. So, first, they talk about graduate training and new interdisciplinary degree programs where courses and training for effective science communication should be offered to science students in order to disseminate their research findings. Public dialogue that matters. So, despite limitations, public discourse on science topics is effective, as research has shown. This can be creatively done by using documentaries or short series. These can be publicized on local and national news media. Data should trump intuition. Science communication should not be based on guesswork, rather on the extensive research done in this field. Connecting to public values. Existing values or priorities of the public should be incorporated when crafting effective science communication. Values do vary across cultures, and messages should be cognizant of that. Going broad beyond elite audiences. All communication tools should be used to increase the reach of science to the broader public. Local news, new types of documentaries, input of scientists on major movies, and perhaps even comedy shows are certain means that have been offered in this paper, which will help broaden the reach of science. Going deep, participatory localized media. Government and private foundations should sponsor public television and radio as science communication hubs between universities, museums, public libraries for sharing user focused and interactive media. Science media literacy curriculum. Media literacy curriculum enables the audience to learn the skills, motivation, and know-how in order to be more participatory citizens of the online and real world. Opinion leader campaigns that bridge audience gaps, certain specially trained science opinion leaders can bridge the gap between inattentive audiences and the messages about climate change, for example. In conclusion, policy debates centered around science are not simply about technical issues, but include values, politics, along with expert knowledge. Public communication and engagement is not simply a selling exercise. The new methods in the paper will help scientists to engage with the public in a respectful manner. The next paper was Leveraging Scientific Credibility about Arctic Sea Ice Trends in a Polarized Political Environment by Jameson and Hardy. One way for scientists to minimize the likelihood of rejection of a scientific message in a politically polarized environment is to eschew advocacy and rather show that they are sharers of knowledge faithful to science's way of knowing and respectful of the audience's intelligence. The sources on which they rely are well regarded by both conservative and liberals. The messages explain how the scientists arrive at the offered conclusion is conveyed in a visual form that involves the audience in drawing its own conclusions. And it encapsulates key inferences in an illustrative analogy. A pilot study was done to show this kind of leveraging involving visualizing analyzing model, the LEVA model, and it has been shown to be effective in increasing acceptance of the scientific consensus in a conservative audience that had previously been exposed to misinformation. Moving past partisan heuristics and leveraging credibility of science and persona. Consensus among science experts needs to be communicated, and partisanship needs to be downplayed for the public to accept the consensus position. In the absence of partisan cues, the public was seen to accept the experts' stance. The conservative media sources attempt to discredit scientific consensus on global warming. Hence, a nonpartisan and well-respected news source like NASA can be used to gain credibility among conservative audience. Credibility of the person communicating is a function of the professional identity, audience's assumption and biases, and the embodied image of the speaker and audience. Credibility of the source not only gets attention, but is also persuasive. The selection of a credible source is necessary to diffuse the ambivalence in the audience concerning science. The scientists should avoid advocacy and only make policy relevant and not policy prescriptive recommendations in order to be viewed as neutral and objective. Role of journalism and challenges posed by partisan media. Two key functions of journalism are custodian and translator of the best available evidence and holding the powerful accountable because the public is dependent on the media for its exposure to scientific knowledge. The LEVA model allows for accurate representation of what scientists do know. Key challenge is confirmation bias that spreads due to partisan news channels leading to increased polarization. Efforts to contextualize the scientific message are important because people are still drawn to attitude discrepant news items. Online is the most used source of scientific information, irrespective of partisanship. It has been found that CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC are the top news channels that are used by people for garnering information, and televised science programs are also viewed favorably by audiences. LEVA using NASA as a credible source. Minimizing identity protecting responses by leveraging NASA's credibility. Using the proposed LEVA model, the scientists can leverage NASA's existing reputation in the audience's mind to bolster credibility also shows that the best available evidence is being used in the communication. NASA has benefited the national defense and economy and is a valued source of accurate information. By attributing climate change data to NASA identity protecting cues can be diminished. Again, best available evidence is being used. Involving the audience in visualizing the downward trend line in Arctic sea extent Showing the graphic of a downward sloping trend line helps cement the view of the declining Arctic sea ice in the minds of the viewers. Analogy for the increase in the extent of sea ice in 2013. Analogy is a powerful communication tool, and the analogy used of a series of poor grades never making up to an eventual A helps connect with the audience immediately and powerfully. Testing the lever model. The effectiveness of the Arctic Sea lever model was tested on a group of 958 participants from a Pew Research study comprising of 48.5% conservative, 28.3% moderate, and 23.2% liberals. The skewness of conservative was deliberate because that's the group that the model is trying to reach out to. These participants were then split into three groups, where one group was effectively shown a FoxNews.com headline about the Arctic sea ice, and also shown the cherry picked data of 2012 and 2013, and showing the 60% jump in Arctic sea ice. And the second group was exposed to the LEVA model, and the third control group was shown baseball without necessarily showing the history of the baseball images. And it was noticed that the LEVA group significantly increased the ice extent knowledge levels over the other two groups. And evidence shows that the LEVA model works by creating accurate knowledge that then changes expectations of the future. However, limitations of the study are that it is not clear which of the LEVA parts or whether the whole of the message achieves the enhanced response. However, bottom line, manipulation was successful. Conclusion. Cherry picking of data leads to erroneous conclusions by the public exposed ideologically biased media, as was seen in the case of Arctic sea ice. Nevertheless, LEVA messaging was used successfully to communicate the downward trend in Arctic sea ice extent. The LEVA model bases its premise on the credibility of a scientific source, in this case NASA, and the ability to leverage that in a visualized manner that involves the audience in connecting the dots of the data and encapsulating the whole in an illustrative analogy. The LEVA model helps in minimizing identity protective cues. The message is clearly careful not to frame itself as countering partisan media, which would only further entrench deep-seated differences. Instead, it is shown as a sharing of knowledge for the best available evidence without any advocacy involved. Challenges to the model. Challenges are three, where the scientists need to assume the first persona and the audiences need to assume the intended second persona, and in the nonpartisan space, inducing them to attend to the message and centrally process values, reinforcing descriptions of a credible source, visualized evidence, and illustrative analogies. The next paper was The Weight of Evidence Reporting, What It Is and Why Use It by Dunwoody. Coverage of contentious topics in science caused journalistic practices of objectivity and balance to come under attack. Boykoff states, continuous juggling act journalists engage in often mitigates against meaningful, accurate, and urgent coverage of the issue of global warming. In this case, weight of evidence reporting can be a successful alternative. Since journalists are rarely able to determine what is true, objectivity and balance have developed to serve as surrogates to truth claims. Journalists can't be asked to take responsibility for the truth of what they're reporting because they lack the knowledge and expertise about a specialized topic. Even experienced journalists can't grasp the factual intricacies of the topics covered. In USA, journalists are expected to be transmitters, and hence taking a stance would be viewed as unacceptable. Objectivity and balance. The objectivity norm. If you cannot tell what's true, then at least capture truth claims accurately is a succinct description of the norm. This absolves the journalist from having to determine truth claims and accuracy is deemed sufficient. Goodness of fit between the story and the source replaces validity. The balanced norm includes all possible truth claims in case if truth cannot be clearly ascertained. Unimportant to determine which of the views is true, but inclusiveness of all possible truth claims is more important. Even experts concede that determining validity of truth claims is messy and hazardous, so journalists should not have that burden upon them. Why change practices? Research has shown people believe what they read and hear. News media coverage is a proxy for legitimacy in public's mind. A study showed that research papers covered by the Times received about 75% more citations in peer reviewed literature than their equivalents that were not published in the Times. Media visibility adds to the credibility of the research even among the scientists. Hence, research visibility in the media certainly tends to skew the balance in its favor. Presentation of opposing views alongside research can create a false sense of balance. The public draws an erroneous conclusion from such balanced stories. No one really knows what's true. The author talks about presenting an alternative. Consider a new strategy, weight of evidence reporting. Determination of truth claims is not needed, only to find out where the bulk of evidence and expert thought lies on the truth continuum and communicate that to audiences. Contrasting views may still be presented, but with the clarifier that the majority of the experts don't side with it. An example of this kind of reporting is Kerr's Confronting the Bogeyman of Climate System, which discusses the slowing down of the oceanic conveyor belt due to excessive ice melting at the poles due to rising temperatures, and not the previously believed shutdown of the conveyor belt based on the majority opinion. This example demonstrates the ability to correctly convey the information to the public without hyperbole or spin. Lastly, the article "Atlantic Climate Pacemaker for Millennia Past, Decades Hence" by Kerr. The ocean conveyor in the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf Stream, has affected not only the regional climate but that of the globe. Scientists are using models to show oscillations in the Gulf Stream and the rest of the conveyor has caused fluctuations in the Atlantic sea surface temperatures. These fluctuations have led to recent uptick in hurricanes, the drying of the Sahel in the 1970s and 80s, and the global warming trends of the past few decades. Increasing evidence shows oceans playing a major role in climate change. Temperatures around the North Atlantic have been seen to rise and fall in 60 to 80-year cycles over the past few centuries, dubbed the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation (AMO). 1,400-year-long simulation on the HAD-CM3 model with no changes in climate drivers like greenhouse gases were considered, but only natural variations. Strong correlation observed between HAD-CM3 model produced AMO and the real-world conveyor variability. The model simulations also support key regional climate events like the recurrent droughts and northeast in northeast Brazil and the Sahel, and the Atlantic hurricanes. The multi-decadal seesawing of summertime climate in the region was also due to AMO. Knight and colleagues see the AMO contributing up to 25% of the global warming, and hence the effect of greenhouse gases is reduced. However, the conveyor should start slowing in about a decade because of the model, leading to more drought-prone summers in the next few decades. But AMO is not as periodic as assumed, and the effect of rising greenhouse gases on AMO is not fully known. Some others would like to have other models weigh in too because of the multi-decadal Atlantic variability is highly dependent on the type of model.